is segregated, as you know, very segregated. You could put all the officers in the Marine Corps probably in the front of this office. We would have parties down on base. There were very few of us. So he became an officer in the Corps. And and all of our friends are pretty much middle class people, and a lot of them were whites, because when I began to work at Prince William County School, I was one of 2 African Americans at central office. So he recently, probably about 8 or 9 years ago, someone said to Jessie, middle class white, and said, don't you hate it when people die because you have to worry about the estate? And my husband said, well, that's not our first worry. Lillie and I worry about who's going to pay for this funeral. Because it's going to be us. And I have friends who are like me, first trying to go to college and having to take care of people in their family. And one of my girlfriends has a funeral fund because she knows that they're going to pay for the funeral. And that's our job. One of the persons who wrote, Ruby Payne, has written a great deal on African American poverty and children of poverty, and she's white. And I remember thinking, going to this workshop, like, what does this white lady know about poverty and black kids? And then I listened to her. I thought, well, she knows a great deal. But one of the things that she said was that you're never away from poverty, that you're never out of poverty until you're 2 generations away. And I think about some of the football players and the Michael Vicks of the world, and how it's just so difficult to make that transition when you're the first. And I remember going back to South Carolina my first or second year in college, and the girlfriends I grew up with, she said to me, oh, so now you say she does instead of she do. And she was trying to embarrass me, and I had to walk away from that. And I think that for a lot of people it's very hard, because you want to keep those ties, or you're always trying to help your family, and so there's just this pull on your resources. But my kids are 2 generations away, and I think that they'll have perhaps more opportunities than I've had, because my husband and I are always helping people and helping our families, and just helping people in general.
So let's just go back a bit when you were talking about not ever going to a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about some of the things that you weren't able to do because of segregation, like restaurants or hotels? Or...
never thought about going to a hotel, really. The library, for example, you didn't have access to a library. We didn't have a library in our high school at all. I think I remember one small room in that school. So you couldn't go to a library. You couldn't go to a restaurant. If we went on a trip, you carried the boxes with you, the boxes with the chicken and the brown bags, and you would find a place along the side of the road where somebody would watch, and you would go out in the weeds and go to the bathroom, because you knew that you were not going to be able to stop at where we, like now, we take for granted, stop at a hotel, stop and go to the bathroom. We didn't have access to those facilities. We didn't swim. African American women are notoriously bad swimmers. They don't swim. Yeah. And we hang out down in the 4 feet of water and throw water on ourselves to make it look like we've been swimming. We're terrible people at parties, swim parties. I don't even attend swim parties. As a result, I put my kids in swimming right away, because I have such a terrible fear of water. And believe it or not, on the school board, there's a big pool thing going on right now. Like, are you voting for the pool? And we don't need a pool, it's a luxury item. And I began to realize that I was totally influenced by my background, that I saw it as a luxury item also because I didn't swim. But then I started to think, whoa, if Prince William County Schools has swimming at a school, a lot of these African American kids, because 7 out of 10 African American kids don't swim, because they come from families like mine, and Hispanic kids, that it's an opportunity for them to learn how to swim because they'll get it at school. And unlike me, when I moved into my apartment, because I was middle class, there was a pool there, and there are so many middle class families that if your kid doesn't go to a pool, you've got resources to take them to a pool. I always say, I have this little expression about you are who you were. It just, I don't know, I think God has a sense of humor. It's like you go, oh, so that's why I did that. Sometimes you do things without knowing why, and it's almost like you have this reflective moment and you start to think, oh, so on the school board recently they like, what's your view on the pool? And I found that I never gave a view. I was just hesitant and reticent, but I've always been a person that I always have to think through things before I say something. And I realized it was all back to watching kids swim and not being able to swim myself, and thinking this is a middle class kind of a sport and it's an elitist kind of thing. And then, of course, my background in education, I now know I've been very successful with kids from all backgrounds, African American, because I know that kids learn differently, and that they're gifted kids who are not the math and science people. They're the swimmers of the world. They're the kids who are the physically gifted kids. They're the linguistically gifted kids. They're the spatially gifted kids. And so I've been able to reach kids because of that. And so I thought, what are you doing? You're here not wanting to vote for something that would allow kids who are physically gifted to have an opportunity to swim. Or why do we support football where it's injurious, and so we now have all these concussion laws, but we don't want to support swimming? But again, it's interesting how everything goes back to who you were. I just think that you really are who you were, and that can be a good thing, or you can go back and cry in your milk. I just found that for me, I've been able to use my past to perpetuate me to a different level of thinking about my future. When I see kids, for example, I never bought into the notion that, you hear it all the time, well, if they had better parents, those parents really don't care. They don't work with their kids at home. These parents are not taking care of their kids. I never bought into that, because I knew my parents weren't going to go to school for a different reason. And I know that in my school, where I was principal of Vaughn Elementary, I had a lot of low-income kids. I had a lot of African-American kids. My minority kids were white kids. And these parents were like my parents. They didn't show up at school because they didn't feel comfortable in school. And plus, we're notorious for using terms that they really don't understand, because, I don't know, I think it makes us look better or feel like we're really intelligent. And so I never bought into that notion that caring, sometimes when I do workshop, I have a little slide that said, don't confuse attendance with caring. Parents care. I remember one of my students who had a lot of problems, and he and his brother, he had been late to school for several days. So I brought him into the office and I said, why are you late to school? And I said, what time did you get out of bed? You know, just being very stern. And he said, which time? And I said, what do you mean, which time? He said, his mom, it's a single mom. He said, which time? And he said, do you mean the time I got dressed in the bed, or the time I got up to get on the bus? I said, what do you mean you get dressed in the bed? He said, well, my mom is the only person working in the house. She has to leave at 5 o'clock in the morning. She gets me up at 5. She dresses me in the bed, and she lets me go back to bed in my clothes. And then at 7:30, my brother is supposed to wake me up. My problem is that he said, I got up at 5, but he forgot to wake me up the second time. And I thought about that here's a mom, only source of income, trying to make a living, has come up with a strategy of how to get her children to school on time. So I've just never, just because you don't come to school doesn't mean you don't care about your kids. Or just because they say, well, these parents need to read to their kids at home. Well, I go back to you are who you are. Nobody read to me, but that doesn't mean I don't have the ability. And and I always say, don't confuse enrichment. Like my kids were enriched. I don't remember. I think my kids were reading maybe 3, 4. I knew they were reading before they went to school, because I read to them all the time. So I agree that if you read to children all the time, they will enter school reading, but that doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to learn how to read. And so for me, it was like 5th or 6th grade that I was a fluent reader. But somebody saw something, they saw something beyond the enrichment piece. And in all black schools, everybody was hoping people could get out. I was talking to a friend about, she said, why did you go back and work on the school board? Because at the time I was publishing a book and I was doing national workshops, and I really could have made a great deal of money. And I said, I went back because I have to help other people get out. She was a white friend. She said, get out of what? And I said, get out of